So welcome, those of you who have just joined us, welcome. This is the first webinar from the Civil Service College. So the Civil Service College is based in London in the UK. Our office is just next to St James's Park. If you come to visit us in person, you'd find us just near St James's Park, kind of very near Buckingham Palace and Parliament. And our delegates quite often at lunchtime will go out and visit some of the sites in London. We're really based in the heart of Westminster. We deliver a wide range of training focused on the civil service skills. Our work is with those who work in the public sector and for those who want to know more about how the public sector works and engage with the public sector. We do a lot of work in the UK, but we also work internationally. We go overseas to deliver training, and we also have, in normal times, quite an extensive programme where we host international delegates in London, and we run training programmes for international delegates. So that's a little bit about the Civil Service College, and we hope one day you'll have the chance to visit us in person. My name is Claire Fisher. I am an associate trainer at the Civil Service College. I am a former civil servant, a senior civil servant working with the UK government, and I now work still very much with the UK government and also internationally. I specialise in strategic leadership in the public sector and also in policy development. I teach on the SOAS, the UK University Master's course in Public Policy. So you're really welcome, a personal welcome from me and a welcome from the Civil Service College. Please do connect with me on Twitter and with the Civil Service College as well. Our details there on the screen for you to see. So as I've said, this is the first of our free policy skills webinar. We're really excited about it. It's something we've put together very recently, and we've been really thrilled actually by the number of people that have expressed an interest. So you are all very, very welcome. Normally in a real live training course, I would be welcoming you all and giving you the chance to introduce yourselves to one another. Obviously we can't quite do it that way this morning, but just to give you a sense of who's kind of in the room with us today, this is a closed session, so you have to register to be here. It's not being broadcast publicly. Most people that have registered and are with us this morning are from the UK, but we do have some people from overseas as well. We've got 5 different UK government departments represented, a number of UK public bodies. We've got 3 people in the room today from UK universities and also universities overseas. So I can see people from universities in the Philippines, in Turkey, in America and Nepal. So you're all really, really welcome. Hello. We've also got 4 different UK local authorities with us today, a number of UK professional bodies and a number of charities. So really interested to hear from you and happy to take your questions. If you missed my tech introduction, do have a look. You should have a question and answer function where you can ask me questions as I go through the presentation. I might pause during the presentation and answer your questions, but I will certainly, the kind of last half of this hour will be all about picking up on the questions that you have asked. So do please get involved that way. Like I said, if you've just joined us, your mics and your videos are disabled just because there's a lot of people and we don't want to risk any disruption. But we do really want to hear from you. So please use the question and answer function to get involved and to get engaged. And just to repeat before I get going, because I can see a lot of people have been joining in these first few minutes, we are recording this webinar, and if you've registered, you will be sent a link to a video. You will also be sent the slides that you will see on your screen, and a link to other resources. So you're all very, very welcome. So this is a taster session. This webinar is taken from a course that I normally deliver called Effective Policymaking, which is a day-long course. And normally at the Civil Service College, we keep our groups really small, so just a few people in the room. or we work in particular organisations. And one of the things we love to do is to tailor our training to make sure it's exactly right for the people in the room. But as you will have heard and gathered, today is a different day. We have lots and lots of people all over the world, all different kinds of public institutions. So today I am focusing on a very general introduction, giving you a little bit about a policy framework and helping you understand these 4 critical elements of a policy process. So I hope it's useful. I hope it's a good starting point for you, and I hope it gives you a framework that you find useful. But if you want to follow up with us and ask us how you can apply it specifically in your organisation and in your work, then please do just get in touch after the webinar and we would be delighted to help you. So it's probably worth thinking before we go very much further about what policy is. This is one of the big questions that we get asked. Often we have people who are policymakers, and maybe it's a little bit hard to understand what policy is. So very briefly, because I want to focus mostly this morning on the policy process, when we talk about policy, we base it on this diagram. It comes from the UK Treasury's Green Book. And it's the idea that policy is the bit that sits in between strategy and delivery. So it's about how do we translate the strategy into reality? It's more than just policies. So it's not just the policies that get written down, although producing those is part of the policy process very much. It is a process, it's a set of skills, it's a profession, and I often describe it as the glue that holds the system together, because without effective policy, the ideas and the vision that are in the strategic level of an organisation do not get translated into delivery on the ground. So it's a kind of making a new future that we imagine a reality in the world. Sean Lusk, who writes on public sector strategy and policy, talks about policy about imagining the future different from how it is now and delivering change in the real world. So policy is the how we do that stuff. And it's tricky. It's not an easy thing because we work in very difficult and complex situations. And for me, that's what makes it so interesting and so much fun. But something that's really important to get our head around is that there is no such thing as a perfect policy. Because we work in a complex environment, it's really hard to have a perfect answer to something. And one of the things that policymakers need to engage with and get their head around is that actually when we're thinking about developing policy, what we're looking for is the best fit, or the least worst option, or the most deliverable. We always have to compromise somewhere. There's never a perfect answer. There's never something that will work for everybody. We have to kind of think about trade-offs and imperfections. So that's something about what policy is. So when I talk about policy in the rest of this morning, that's what I will be talking about. That's what I mean. And so this morning's session, we thought we would introduce the idea of a policy cycle. Some of you, particularly those of you who work in the UK, may be familiar with this. This is called the ROMEF cycle. This is the policy cycle that is in the Treasury's Green Book, and it underpins policy making across the public sector. And I know that similar systems operate across the world. So I have worked all over the world. I've worked extensively in the Caribbean. I've worked a little bit in UAE, Philippines, Indonesia, South Korea. I've done lots of work in Brussels as well. And there's a version of something that looks like this that underpins policy making pretty much everywhere you go. And if you want to find out more, that Green Book, the reference is there on the website, is the UK Treasury's Guide to Policy Appraisal. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend that as a kind of follow-on activity from this webinar. But that's a little bit complex, and it's also very niche. This particular framework is very niche to the UK central government. So this morning, To make things a little bit simpler, we're going to look at a 4-stage policy process. It does much of the same stuff, it's just a bit more simplified. And it also helps understand a little bit more generally an application that hopefully will make sense for you in your context, even if you're not basing your work on our Treasuries model. So this 4-stage process, deliver, explore, create, decide, is what I'm going to walk you through in the next kind of 15-20 minutes or so. And then, like I said, I'd be really happy to answer questions. So I hope you can see the question and answer panel. Do please, you're not going to interrupt me. If you want to just type some questions in there, that would be great. The way the question and answer function is set up, you won't be able to see the questions that everybody else is asking until I share them, which I'll do at the beginning of the question and answer session, but I will see them coming in as you type them. So do please use that to engage as we go through the session. So what does a good policy process look like? So I'm going to walk you through the steps, but before we think about those 4 steps, how do we know what a good policy process looks like? And there's a couple of things I think it's important to think about. So firstly, think about the fact that the process is not linear, okay? The policy doesn't start and finish, and sometimes when we think in project terms, maybe we get a bit confused. The idea of the policy process is that we need to think about how do we learn from what's gone before, and how do we look to the future? How do we kind of build in reviews and evaluations and refreshes at the end of the process? So always think of it as a cycle rather than as a linear process. So even when I'm taking you through the 4 steps, remember, we never start anything from scratch in policy making. Somebody somewhere has already thought about the problem that you're dealing with, and a good starting point is to think about what they've already done. A good policy process should be flexible. We work in complicated and complex environments. Just like there's no one right policy, there's also no one perfect policy process. So as I explain this framework, the idea is to give you a way of thinking about policy making that is helpful, that helps you navigate through this uncertainty, but you need to make it work for you. You need to adapt it for your local situation, and you can bring in all sorts of different tools and techniques to make it work for you. And in our training courses, if you were doing our effective policy making one day, or we were working with your organisation, that's what we would be doing. We would be looking at how can we tailor this process so that it works for you, and which particular tools and techniques would be most appropriate. But for now, I'm just going to set out the framework, and you can work and adapt it as you see fit, and ask us questions about how that might work best for you. A policy process is not one person sitting in a room doing all of these things. It has to be collaborative. It's very rare that the same person works on a policy beginning to end. You might want to think about it like a relay race, perhaps, where you pass the baton to a different team in between the different phases. And also it's really important to think about when you bring people in and how you make that work effectively. So these are my 3 kind of tests for what I think a good policy process looks like. And now we're going to just dive in to the steps, looking at them one by one in a little bit more detail. And like I said, please do just keep the questions coming in, and I will pick those up as we go or in the session at the end. So our first step, the explore phase, step 1. The question, the fundamental question that you're looking to answer in the explore phase is this: is the problem that you think is the problem actually the problem? And I'm going to say that again. Is the problem that you think is the problem actually the problem? In policy making, I see a lot of times people rushing through this important first step, particularly because often we work in a politically driven environment, and particularly in my life anyway, policy often starts from a minister who maybe has a good idea, and in one sentence, very often the minister will express what they believe the problem is, and also what they think the solution is. So they may say, for example, the problem, we need to do something about the problem of too many obese children in our schools, and the problem is they don't do enough PE, and therefore we need to put some more PE into the curriculum. Okay, and in that one sentence, they've identified the problem and the solution and commissioned you to deliver something. But actually, do we know that obesity is a problem? Do we know where specifically it is a problem geographically? Do we know actually what causes it? Are we sure that the cause of this problem is the lack of physical education in the curriculum, or are there other things driving it? Do we know that increasing PE in the curriculum is actually the solution to this problem? So it's really, really important in the explore phase to find out as much as you can about the current situation. Be really sure about your evidence, gather your evidence. It's about thinking what you're trying to achieve. It's about setting up project plans. It's about thinking about who needs to be involved in solving this problem. Also, you need to understand your context. You need to understand your constraints, the limits of your power. So for in the UK, it's really important at the beginning of the policy process to understand, is this something that is a devolved matter, for example? Is this policy something that will affect just England and Wales? Do we also need to think about how it affects the devolved administrations? Is it something that Europe has a role in? Where does the power lie? Is it something that local authorities maybe need to be involved in? So really understanding your context is a critical first step. In this explore phase as well, we want to think about what would success look like? How do we know what success looks like? What are we trying to achieve? How do we define success? And that might be a conversation as well, looking at data and how we're going to try and improve things. Understanding what you're trying to achieve is really important. So going back to our childhood obesity example, what do we actually want? Do we want children to be fitter or healthier? Are we looking at extending life expectancy? What kind of time might our project go over? Setting up your success criteria early on is really, really important. Being clear about where the impetus has come from for a policy. It's very often political, as I've mentioned, and it's really important to understand where your policy comes from so that you know how to target your response. And when we come to the decide phase, that really matters about who are you engaging with in terms of a decision. We also talk about the explore phase as giving you the opportunity to engage with often the minister, in my example, how you might need permission to linger in this explore phase. Okay, so you might need to say to your minister, okay, I understand you think this is the problem and this is the solution. Would it be okay if I went and did a little bit more work, if I developed some options, if we found out what was best and how to work with it? So the explore phase, really, really important. It's all about understanding your context and your constraints and gathering your information and getting ready so that you can make a success of your policy making process. So thank you. I'm going to pause before we just go on to the next phase. People are asking questions already. That's really, really good. And I will come to those, I promise you, at the end. Somebody's asked me specifically about how does this fit with the agile project methodology, and I promise you, if you hang on, I think in about 4 slides time I've got this, it's coming, so it does kind of fit, and I will talk to you about that in a little while. We'll pick up some of the other questions in the Q&A at the end. So explore is your first step. Your second step, sorry, there we go, getting my questions in a slight tangle. The second step, once you've understood the problem, you need to think about creating options for a solution. Now, the big idea in this phase is there is no one right option. Okay, policy is complex. The situations that we work in are complex. There is never just one perfect solution. Gus O'Donnell, who used to be the head of the UK Civil Service, said to me when I was very early on in my UK Civil Service career, if you think you've got the perfect solution and if you think the solution is easy, you're doing it wrong. because either you don't fully understand what you're working with, or frankly, if it's that easy, somebody else should have already done it. That often the job of the policymakers in the public sector is to deal with the really tricky stuff. So we can expect our brains to be aching at this point. We can expect to really struggle to come up with the right idea, or we can expect to be absolutely overwhelmed and inundated with suggestions from all our stakeholders about the different way that we could work, and be a little bit confused, frankly, about which the right way forward is. So in our create phase, it's all about thinking, how do I understand the range of options that are available to me? Okay, so we talk about soft options, things like nudge and communication. We talk about medium kind of options like financial incentives, and if you're a government, you might be able to go all the way up to legislative options as well, and kind of require people to do things. And there's all sorts of reasons why you might use those different tools, but understanding the range of tools available to you is really, really important. And again, on our one-day course, we would explore that in a little bit more detail. We would look about the kind of interventions that a government or a charity or university could make and the ways they can involve with the policy process. But for now, in this create phase, be really clear that you need to come up with lots and lots of different options. So find ways to be creative in your option development. It might be that you want to bring in stakeholders. Bringing in diverse perspectives in this process is a really great way of finding out different ways that you can do things. So stakeholder engagement, for example, thinking about how you bring in evidence from experts about what works, thinking about how you learn from other places and other people that have tried similar things and how you might adapt. So this is a kind of learning and creating phase. It's really, really important. Our third phase in the policy process, once you've got a whole load of options, lots and lots of different ones, and maybe you've started to whittle them down and you've started to think about which is most appropriate, you need to come to a decision. So a decision is what moves you from a bunch of ideas to something that can become reality, and it's really, really important. There's something here about timing. So knowing when to move to the decision phase is really important, particularly if you become a little bit overwhelmed, perhaps in the option creation phase. You think, my goodness, there's so many things here. How do I even begin to decide? Perhaps you also, from your explore phase, have started to appreciate just how complicated and difficult the process is and the problem is, and you maybe feel a little bit overwhelmed. Like I say, I work in academia. I work with a lot of academics, and I know that there's a real risk when you get experts and academics involved in a situation that all they want to do is do more research. They feel that you can't rush to a decision. But there comes a point when a decision has to be made in order to move the policy from a bunch of experts having lovely ideas in a room to a decision. And often in public policy, there is an imperative to act. There's a political demand to get on and do something and deliver. So we need to think about who decides, understand the process. So again, in my context, often a minister, often there's a clearance process that has to be gone through that you have to understand. And if the option that we're going for is legislative, then also you need to understand, how does the legislative process work and how do you engage with that? So again, understanding your situation, thinking about who needs to make those decisions, how you communicate with them, what the best way of doing that is. In the civil service, this is briefing. This is briefing. This is decision making. This is writing submissions. These are all skills that become part of the toolkit of good policymakers, because you need to move from an idea to a decision. And like I said, policy is never straightforward. There's never one perfect answer. So the decision-making phase is also where we start to engage with things like trade-offs, cost, risk, consequences, being clear that the person who's making the decision, or the group or the body or the parliament that's making the decision, understands the complexity and the difficulty and the risks involved in the policy decisions that they are making. Another thing that's really important about the decision-making phase is it enables you to recruit a champion. Now, the Audit Commission in the UK did a really interesting piece of work looking at why policies fail. And one of the main reasons they identified that policies fail in the kind of big political arenas is for lack of a champion. With so many people involved in policy making, it's so important that there's one person or one very clear voice or clear champion who you can lead the charge, if you like, when things get difficult for your policy to make sure that it really happens and that it really follows through. So thinking in this decision-making phase about who is your champion, how do you get them on board, how maybe after the decision has been made, do we use them to publicly communicate the fact that a decision's been taken, all really important stuff. Okay, so once you've got to your decision, a decision has been made, we know what we are dealing with, we need to get on and deliver something. So this is so important, particularly those of you maybe who've worked in the civil service or public sector organisations. It can feel like the decision is the achievement, and we need to understand that delivery is where you see change happen in the real world. It's not a press release, it's not an announcement, it's not even a piece of legislation making it through Parliament. Delivery is where the thing that you were trying to achieve for some real people in the real world actually happens, okay? Implementation is not a bolt-on, it's a critical part of the process, and it requires planning. And what I see very often, a lot of organisations will have an implementation planning template or document or process that asks all sorts of really useful questions, like who needs to be involved, how much is it going to cost, what's your timescale, what are your success measures, all sorts of very useful things. Often, when people plan for implementation, this is the first time they've thought of some of these questions. And for me, that's a real warning bell that your policy process is flawed. Because if you're having to think about those things after you've made the decision to do it, it really shows you've missed out some critical steps. So another test to think about, is your policy process effective? Your implementation planning should be fairly easy, because if you've done your explore, your create and your decide phases carefully and well, really all of that thinking has been front loaded, so you should be able to get on with your implementation fairly quickly. Of course, you'll also need to think about monitoring and evaluation and building that into your delivery phase to build that cycle back again. But again, the Green Book, the Treasury methodology suggests that what you measure and what you evaluate are your success criteria that you should have been considering really in the explore phase. So again, delivery is about making it real in the real world. Moving beyond just outputs though in delivery and very much into the territory of outcomes and impact. And often I talked earlier about the baton being passed between different bits of the organisation, and very often the delivery is where the baton gets passed, perhaps from a central department to a delivery agency or to a public body or to a frontline service. And historically, there's been a lot of problems because there's been a gap between that central thinking function and the external kind of doing function. But remember that triangle that I showed you right at the beginning of the webinar. Policy should link those two things together very much. So the delivery bit has to be part of the process of development and consideration. You can't just bolt it on at the end, publish a beautiful document, bung it out into the real world and expect it to work. We need to think about these as an integrated delivery, as an integrating part of the process. So just wrapping up then on these 4 phases, and then I'm going to start taking questions. So I'm seeing that we have got a few questions already, but now would be a really good chance, just as I bring this little part of the webinar to a close. If you have been thinking of a question as I've been talking, just use that Q&A function, and I will work through those in the final chunk of our webinar. So those are the 4 stages that I've talked you through: explore, create, decide, deliver. And just to kind of go back to where we started from, really, it's a cycle. It's not a linear process. So delivery is not the end of it's not an end point, it's not a destination. It's often the beginning of a cycle repeating. And this is very much how policies develop and how they improve. So one of the questions that I've been asked, and do please send more in if you want me to cover some other things as well. One of the questions that I've been asked is, how do we marry this process with an agile methodology? So you can run the process deliberately at speed. So one of the questions I get very often is, how long does a policy process take? Well, it's really, how long is a piece of string? You can run it really quickly. You know, you could run the whole thing in a day. In the policy workshops, that's what we do often as a training example, but we go through the 4 stages fairly quickly. I did a project in Dubai with the Ministry of Happiness, which is a brilliant thing. Can you imagine working in a place with the Ministry of Happiness? And we had ministers as part of our cohort, and we ran this process in a week. So we ran a kind of live workshop over a week, where we had teams doing research. We had stakeholders coming in and engaging on stuff. The ministers came in kind of at the end of the week, and they received the presentations and the ideas. They made the decisions. Okay, they didn't deliver it, but by Friday of this week, they had their delivery plans in place, and then Monday morning they were going to start the rollout. So you can do it really quickly. And actually, that's the best way. If you're thinking about working with an agile methodology, you can think of it in that way, as a kind of cycle that kind of goes round and round. So for some policies, it's appropriate to run it at speed, to test, to learn, to adapt. Another thing you can do to mix it in with the agile methodology is to think about the maybe the create phase. You can do prototyping. Because in your decision phase, you want information on which to make your decisions. So perhaps you can run a number of different options, a number of different prototypes in the create phase to gather evidence that shows you which is the best one. And then you can use that in the decide phase to decide which is the one that you want to go with and which you're going to roll out. So like I said, you can run it deliberately at speed, or you can slow it down. So for some big stuff, it might be appropriate to kind of linger in the explore phase to do some really detailed work. So I mentioned the childhood obesity strategy. In the UK, I know that there was some incredible work done there, some really, really clever evidence gathering and systems thinking and mapping, and really, really understanding all the complex ways that this problem existed and all the causes of it, and really kind of getting to grips with that, so that by the time we come to the design delivery phase, we really understood it. So that was quite a slow process. Other things we have to do much more quickly, and we have to learn as we go. So you can run it in a day, you can run it over 3 years, you can kind of contract it or expand it to fit your situation. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation, and I'm going to move into questions. So I think what we'll do, sorry, I'm just reading your questions as we go. So hopefully I've managed to talk a little bit about the agile process. There we go. So a couple of questions that are coming in. On a practical level, somebody's asked me about whether they can share this presentation with friends and colleagues. This link won't work. This link is to this live webinar. If you share the link that you've received, it won't do anything after this is finished, I'm afraid. But after this webinar is concluded, as I've said, we will be sending you a link. We will make an edited version of this a recording of this webinar available on our website, I expect, and there's also going to be other resources, and we'll send the slides out to you. So those things you can share, but this particular link won't work. So there we go, let me mark that one as done. Great, let me read. So the next question I'm going to look at is, how does an organisation successfully measure the impact of a policy where it involves a behavioural process shift for stakeholders rather than a physical deliverable output? Brilliant. I think most policies actually are about behaviour change. And I think often when we think it's about a physical deliverable output, we are deluding ourselves, if I'm honest, because even when we're thinking about an output as a brand new hospital, or an output, let's stick with the hospital. If you're thinking it as a brand new hospital, what we're actually thinking about still is the behaviour change, isn't it? About how do we refer people there? How do we find that the staff are motivated to work? How do we help the GPs understand what's going on? So behavioural change, or changing behaviour, is actually really at the heart of most of what we do in the public policy process. And so measuring that and measuring the impact of that is a tricky thing. We often end up doing quite a lot of survey work. I work a lot on well-being, and there's now survey data to look at how well people feel, and we've even managed to work with the Treasury to think about how we can now measure the economic benefit of that, and there's been some new guidance issued recently which is really, really interesting. And I think we need to think about how we work with experts. So the behavioural science stuff is so interesting and so important at the moment, and they've got lots and lots of clever ways of doing it, and again, the specific courses and specific input that we can do on that. But I think actually understanding that policy change in the real world is generally actually about people changing their behaviour is probably a good starting point. Okay, somebody's saying, I find it difficult to distinguish between strategy and policy. Well, yes, don't we all? The UK civil service system defines strategy as the where and policy as the how. That's the very, very basic definition. So strategy is everything to do with looking at the future and imagining the future different from how it is now. So strategy is the bit where you say, in 5 years' time, we would like this to be different because. And then policy is how you are going to make that happen. Okay, so how you translate your vision to your reality. So your strategic thinking is all about the big, the future. Your policy is all about the how. And in smaller organizations particularly, the two roles are often blurred, and that makes it really, really tricky. I've got quite a lot of resources on my website, and we'll send you some links out about strategic thinking and the difference between strategy and policy. But for now, strategy is the where, policy is the how, and the delivery is the what. It's the what you actually do. So another Claire asked me that. I hope that's okay. Central thinking, okay. Oh, there's lots and lots of questions coming in. I'm just going to have a little look through these. What I will say is I'm going to try and group them together. I'm kind of trying to give you some general answers, try not to get too sucked into doing specific stuff, but we will follow this up with an email where we can talk about some of these a little bit more generally. Somebody's asked about politics, how we consider politics as part of the process. And I say, absolutely, you need to consider politics. We talk about needing to think about politics, evidence and delivery. Somebody else has asked about the gap between the central policy making function and the ground delivery. In a longer course, I'd have shown you a Venn diagram where I basically say at every stage of that process, you need to think about politics, evidence and delivery together, and if any one of those gets missed out at any stage of the process, then you're on to a loser, basically. So politics, evidence, delivery should be your mantra at every stage of the process. So I hope that kind of helps answer those questions. Oh, some people just saying thank you. That's nice. Thank you very much. How you deal with failures. I'm being asked about what happens when policies fail. I think understanding what failure means is really important, because like we've said, it's not possible to have a perfect policy that works for everybody. It's just not possible. So what your definition of failure is quite interesting. If some people don't like it, is that failure? If it cost more than it expected, is that failure? But I think for me, it's about being honest. It's about being transparent, having a process where you learn. So maybe think about whenever there's something that goes wrong or something that doesn't work as you expected, how do you learn from that? How do you share that information honestly, and how you feed that back into your learning for when you go around the cycle again is really, really important. Okay. Great. How do you measure? What do you measure? How do you measure success? What are the indicators that you use? Wow. Okay. I think I'm not going to answer that because it's a huge question. I think in the explore phase, what you need to do is think about how you measure success in the policy area that you're thinking about, and what kind of indicators would be appropriate for your policy. Again, if you have a little look in the Green Book, in the UK Treasury Green Book, that's available on the UK website, then you will find some more information and some more guidance there. But really, it depends so much on the particular case of your policy. The main thing is to think early on about how you're going to measure it and what the indicators are. Think about it in the explore phase, so that when you come to do your measurement and your evaluation, then you go back to those same measures. That's a really, really important part of the process. Okay. Okay, great. How do I come up with new ideas in the create phase? I love that. That's a brilliant question. In the resources that we'll send out after the webinar, I'm going to recommend two things very strongly to you. There's some stuff, there's an organisation called Nesta, N-E-S-T-A in the UK. They've got a DIY toolkit, which is online, lots and lots of great ideas. And also the UK Cabinet Office has a policy lab. And again, they publish lots of really, really great resources. So finding ways to come up with creative new ideas, thinking carefully about the range of options, it's really, really important. So for me, there's those tools that are available, but actually it's about a diverse group of people getting involved and thinking creatively. So don't just work with your policy team in your organisation. Think, who else can I talk to about this? Which experts are there? How do I engage stakeholders? How do I look at what's going on overseas? So really think about that. And again, on my website and in the list of resources that we'll send you, there's a little bit more about that. So have a look there. Somebody's asked me specifically about private organisations. I have done some work in the private sector and we do use these processes, but I have to be honest and say these processes are designed particularly and specifically for the public sector, and specifically where you need an accountability of decision making and where you're dealing with very complex situations. So if you find it helpful, it can feel a little bit like a kind of test, learn, adapt type model or a project plan. But we are talking specifically about public sector stuff today. I've got several questions here as well about COVID and the current situation, and specifically how they affect the countries like Nepal. I'm not going to have a go at answering that. I think that's huge. But what I will say is, just like it's important to understand kind of where you are in the process, actually. And I think for me, we are kind of very much in an emergency mode at the moment in what we're dealing with COVID. So people are kind of running this process at speed, but I think it's a little bit too soon. I know people are starting to talk about what are we learning from this, and how do we apply this and where do we go forward from here. But I think it's a little bit early to be doing that kind of review just yet. We need to kind of hold off a little bit. But I have written some articles about how the kind of emergency process fits in with the policy process. And again, links to that are on my website, and we we'll send you details of that in the resources, but I think we're not quite able yet to say how this is going to play out in the long term. So there's been lots of questions, which has been brilliant. I will go through them again. Thank you, lots of people saying thank you, it's useful, very good. Okay, one more just before I kind of move on to the wrap up. Somebody's asking me, is it fundamentally flawed to think that policy is higher than strategy? And I think this is a really important point. So often in the private sector, if you were to draw that triangle, policy would be at the top and strategy would be in the middle. And in the military as well, actually, the two terms are used the other way around. And I think this is really important. This is where it's different, because one of the key functions of the public sector is to think about how do we change the future for people. So in public sector terms, strategy is higher than policy because there's something there about the strategy evolves and it develops, and it's about reimagining the future as different from the now. And then policy is about delivering that. In military terms, and often in the private sector, you have a very definite end goal that kind of is a given. It doesn't change so much, and so your policy, your strategy is more about more tactics. So often in the private sector and in the military, what they talk about of strategy is actually tactics, and it's about implementing policy. So I think it is important, particularly in the public sector, to be really clear about the terms. And again, in the one-day course, that's something we'd spend a little bit longer on, but if you want to have a look, read some of the stuff in the Green Book. But for the way that I've been talking about policy today, it's a very particular public sector thing, and it is very much about implementing strategy. So thank you so much for engaging. Thank you so much for your questions. Oh, great, good. More lovely things. Thank you so much. I will review those questions and just have a bit of a think about whether I have actually answered all of them. And if there's other things that we can usefully put out, we'll include that in our follow-up email. So let me just wrap up by thanking you all so much for joining this webinar. Like I said, it's the first ever one that we've done. We put it together at, in under a week. So we hope that it's been useful for you. We'd be interested in your feedback. Some of you have put lovely things in the comments. Thank you so much for that. But we will be interested in your feedback, because hopefully this will be the first of a series. We might look at other things going forward. So this has been the Civil Service College webinar on policy skills with me, Claire Fisher. We would love to keep in touch with you. Please do find us on Twitter or have a look at our websites. Like we've said, we have recorded this session, and so probably later on today you'll be getting an email if you registered on this webinar with a link to the slides. We'll make the recording of the main section available, and we'll also send you links to some of the resources and the websites that we've mentioned. But for now, let me just say thank you so much for being involved. We hope that you have enjoyed it, and do please stay tuned, because we hope we'll do something similar again very soon. Thank you so much, everybody. Goodbye.